Hey everybody, I'm Jack Reeder with Future Pastimes. I'm a designer on Dune-themed board games and expansions, and this is my spoilery review of Dune Part 2. I'm going to go into a lot of details about differences between the book and the movie, how those stack up, and what I think of the movie overall. And I can start off with that. I think it's a great movie. I don't think it's a great adaptation if you're talking about faithfulness to the book as your top criteria. I read somewhere that somebody's opinion was that it was a perfectly faithful adaptation, and that is absurd. It is so different from the book in almost every measurable way. I don't think that's necessarily a problem. In my spoiler-free review, I summed it up by saying that Dune Part 2 is very much of Dune, even though it is not a very accurate adaptation of the book. And I described it to some friends as very much Part 1 and Part 2 seemed to be written and made from somebody who read Dune and loved it, but hasn't read it recently. They remember a lot of the big set pieces, a lot of the action. They don't remember any of the details. So if you're somebody who cares about the details and cares about faithfulness of the adaptation, brace yourself, because a lot of liberties are taken, a lot of things are changed, and I'm going to go through a bunch of them, talk about what is different. And like I said, I don't think it really matters in the end. If you're talking about seeing a Dune movie and enjoying it, it is a great movie. It's got great action. It's got a good story. There's a great story arc for Paul, for Chani especially, and for the whole story of the novel on the whole. But even like where the movie begins, we pick up very much where the last movie ended up. They're transporting Jamas's dead body to Siege Tabra, and they're on the move, and they are still carrying his body, moving, but there's a Harkonnen patrol coming in, and it's a fantastic sequence where the Harkonnens have suspensor belts, and they do this jump and climb up, climb up to the top of a mountain to get a better vantage, and then they're picked off by Fremen with Mauler pistols, I assume. And it's a really great sequence. Not in the book. That doesn't happen in the book. They get all the way to the siege without any molestation. There are certainly Harkonnen patrols out there that they're careful of and watchful for, but none of this sequence actually happens. And does it really matter? As I said, I don't think it does. It's a really great sequence. It grips you, it pulls you in. It lets you know that there are still dangers, that the Fremen, and they make a point of it. They're like, this Harkonnen patrol this far south, they're not looking for Paul and Lady Jessica, in Stilgar's opinion. They're just out to harass and kill Fremen. He could be wrong, though. They certainly know that Paul and Jessica, their bodies were never found. It's assumed that they're dead. And I think probably Stilgar in the end is right, that they're not specifically looking for them. They may be looking for other Atreides survivors, anybody else who got away. So who knows? But Fremen make short work of them, and Paul and Lady Jessica do as well. Then we get some scenes of on Kaitain, although it's not specifically called out, but we're seeing the Emperor and we're seeing Irulan, and Irulan's doing a little bit of some narration, very similar to how she does at the beginning of most of the chapters in the book, which is a nice touch, and she proves as a little bit of a catching the audience up on what has happened, which is nice. But of course, in the book, we don't see Irulan and the Emperor until the very end of the book. So these scenes didn't really happen. But I think for a movie, they need to happen. And in the other two adaptations, we did have early scenes with the Emperor, seeing what is going on from his perspective. Not so much Irulan in the Lynch movie, but in the miniseries, they elevate Irulan as much as, in fact, more than Villeneuve does. But I think it's a good call. it makes her a more interesting character. It makes the ramifications of what happens at the end a little more important, and you get a nice scene sort of midway through where Irulan realizes that when they get the sense that Paul is still alive, or could be still alive, and that the Bene Gesserit are also grooming Fade as another possible path to the Kwisatz Haderach. They're stealing Irulan for the fact that she's going to be used as a pawn, marrying somebody to get onto the throne to help further the Bene Gesserit's cause, which is nice because it really shows that the Bene Gesserit at least feel like they are her true overlord, and she is doing their bidding more than she's doing the Emperor's bidding, and she can fool herself into thinking that it's for the good of the Imperium overall, but even there she doesn't seem totally sold. But she's like, well, this is my fate. She didn't see any way out of it. So it's good. It's not slavishly faithful to the book, and I think that is fine as well. But some other stuff, a lot of stuff is just happening out of order. So Paul's naming ceremony should have happened right away. In fact, it does before they even start heading out for Siege Tabra. They call him Usul and have him choose his name of manhood. But in the movie, it happens much, much later. He's been out fighting with the Fremen, learning the ways of the desert, and that's when they name him Usul and they have him choose Muad'Dib, or Paul Muad'Dib. And in fact, Stilgar calls him Paul Muad'Dib. So the whole element of he needs to pay tribute to his Atreides heritage by being Paul Muad'Dib and not just Muad'Dib. So that was a little bit changed as well. And it felt like they just misremembered. They didn't actually go back and read the book and then write the screenplay. They're like, oh yeah, I remember there was a naming ceremony at some point, and they call him Usul, and then they end up calling him Paul Muad'Dib, and the some of those details there. The Shashekli character is interesting. Shashekli has one moment in the book. Here, Usul, are my maker hooks for when you do your worm ride, which is very close to the end of the book. But they make Shashekli more of a confidant for Chani, and a character to help explain what's going on and to challenge certain things. I did like the whole idea of the fundamentalist sect of the Fremen and the more progressive modernist sect, and Stilgar is very much part of the group of Fremen that believe in the prophecy, and they're looking for the signs and the portents. And Chani and Shashekli and some of the other younger Fremen kind of mock it and disdain it, and they're not sold on it. And Paul's trying to straddle both worlds, which is interesting. It's not really out of the book per se, but it is kind of subtext in the book, and so it's easy to understand. And there's a funny moment where they explain why Javier Bardem doesn't have the same accent as everybody else, which as a criticism I'd read of the first movie, but they explain it pretty well. It's pretty interesting how they do that. But both Shashekli and Chani's characters are much more developed, and Chani is this. She's very questioning of the prophecy, and she doesn't buy into any of that nonsense. And Paul knows as well that it's all poppycock that has been planted generations before by the Bene Gesserit, and he knows that his mother is exploiting it. And I liked that part. They definitely leaned into that for this adaptation. Jessica's working behind the scenes trying to fill as many Fremen heads with the idea that her son is the chosen one. Even though at that point they're already accepted into the tribe. She's become a Reverend Mother. Paul is more or less accepted as a Fremen. They're even calling him a Fedaykin after his naming ceremony. So it was, in the book, it's a lot more important earlier on because they're trying to guarantee their safety in the tribe. And So yeah, it's a little bit fuzzy with the timeline, but again, the theme of Jessica exploiting the legends is very much from the book, and that is good. And there's even a point in the book where Paul is like, Lady Jessica is my enemy now because of this, because he knows that if she keeps exploiting it, it's just pushing his prescient vision of genocide closer to reality. And that seemed to be the major theme of this movie, was Paul's struggle to avoid it. And the way they did it was with him not wanting to go to the southern sietches where most of the fundamentalists were, the Fremen who were most likely to cotton to the idea that he is the chosen one, and that Fremen fanaticism would just explode exponentially. And it's not something that Chani wants, but it's something that Stilgar is not afraid of. And it feeds into this idea of how they ultimately can defeat the Harkonnen and reclaim the planet and make a paradise. So that is a central theme of the book, and that is the central theme of the movie. And so in those regards, it is faithful to that element. It's just, like I said, the details are all over the place. So the worm ride, and that was one of the sneak preview things that we saw when they brought Dune Part 1 back to IMAX. There was that whole worm ride scene was shown after the credits, and it's thrilling. It's a great scene. It's really well done. It's pretty close to how it is in the book, except in terms of when it happens. In the book, the worm ride happens, and then right after that is when they find Gurney and the smugglers, and right after that is where they capture the Sardaukar, and so it's right towards the end of the book, and here it's like halfway through the movie, and it's a great sequence, but again, it's really out of order, and the whole Gurney thing happens much later in it. So we don't get any of the sequences of Gurney embedding with the smugglers. There's no Tuiks in there. We see a smuggler sort of operating a smuggler harvester. We see the really cool kind of, I don't know, Time Bandits-esque carry-all that the smugglers have. And there's a great sequence with these booby traps that the Fremen use to attack the smugglers. Not really in the book, but very cool the way that it was done. Then we'll talk about the Harkonnen. So we do finally get introduced to Feyd-Rautha, and it's pretty much at the arena scene, which is one of my favorite sequences in the book. And they get a lot of it right. They talk about this whole thing about the star of Gedi Prime is why everybody's bald, and it's why that whole sequence is in black and white, is because it's outdoors. And I was very skeptical of it for a long time. It felt like it was just a way for them to stay in PG-13 without having to show blood and gore. They didn't show any blood even in the black and white, infrared footage. So it could have been in full color, and I think I still probably would have preferred it that way, but they did some interesting things with how the light affects things. There's a really great sequence of the Bene Gesserit, a bunch of Bene Gesserit sisters come into a viewing box, and they're in the shadows where their attire is all black, and then they step into the light and everything turns white. Very cool. And that alone, I think, convinced me, like, all right, I can live with this. And it's a great sequence. Some differences from the book, though. So there are several Atreides, but some of them are drugged, and Lanville not drugged, which was a nice touch, because the one slave that he fights is an Atreides man who's not drugged, and it's part of a plot that Feyd and Thufir cook up. Thufir, by the way, captured by the Harkonnens, but not in this movie. So he and Feyd cook up this plot in order to implicate the slave master so that he will be executed, and then one of Feyd's men can slip into his place, and he can start elevating, getting more of his people into positions of power. It turns out, though, that it's not Feyd's idea. It's the Baron's idea, which, again, it feels like it was just a misremembered detail. I don't really think that it necessarily improved the storyline that way. It makes Feyd less of a cunning and ambitious character. So I think it does him a disservice. but I think they felt like they wanted the Baron to just be more of the master of plots in the Villeneuve adaptation. Although he doesn't really have that many scenes to demonstrate his mastery of the web of lies and intrigue that he is trying to manipulate. So I was really expecting some more scenes with the Baron. I would have liked to have seen the Baron go toe-to-toe with Count Fenring, but there's no Count Fenring in the movie. It's just Lady Margot. And the seduction scene where she, in the book, where she seduces him and then she implants the word in his subconscious that can be used to not necessarily control him, but to basically stun him. This the same trick that he used on the slave, more or less. They replaced that with having Lady Fenring do the Gam Jabbar box test with Fade. From a storyline perspective, it's an interesting choice. I don't mind it so much. I think it's an interesting tactic for them to use. But yeah, that came out of nowhere. So yeah, we don't really get as much from the Baron. And he does basically send Fade to Arrakis early. They actually go there, and Fade starts to turn things around, which also doesn't really happen in the book. There's some good sequences of Raban not being a very good leader that are made up for the movie, and we expect to see those sorts of things, and they're good. But it's quite a departure from how it plays out. We get a little more Bene Gesserit behind the scenes action. The Reverend Mother explaining mostly to Irulan, but also to the audience, what it is the Bene Gesserit are trying to do. But the sequence where Lady Jessica takes the water of life, I was really expecting more emphasis and more clarity for the audience's sake on what is happening. She casually mentions she's going to be getting all these memories. But then later on, she's asking somebody to explain to her and to explain to Aliyah, which I'll get to here in a minute, how the get the water of life. And I think if you have generations of Bene Gesserits, especially on Arrakis, somebody out there probably knows. So I don't think that she needed that to be explained. So I think that confuses the audience. And I think they really think, oh, they don't have all these memories, because they really don't tap into that very much. And, we don't get that nice scene in the book where Aliyah goes to the, explains how the baby looked like somebody from generations past, and they're like, how could she possibly know that? And that's because she is not really a character in any meaningful sense. She's in utero the whole movie, and she has little conversations with Jessica, but it's mostly from Jessica's side. We don't really hear Aliyah talking about what it is that she's saying, thinking, and feeling. We're just getting it secondhand, and it feels a little bit too cute and clever by half, the way that it's done. I understand why they didn't want to have a 2-year-old or like a CG character running around. I'm a little disappointed. I was looking forward to seeing how they were going to pull that off, and they definitely didn't even try. So it was an interesting approach, but this they downplayed her. She's a full Bene Gesserit, Reverend Mother, in the womb. So you don't really get that sense. And there's one little prescient scene where you've got Anya Taylor-Joy as Aliyah, although they don't make it explicitly clear that that's who that is, especially when she tells Paul she loves him. I think that was going to be confusing for a lot of audience people. They're not going to fully understand what was going on there. But yeah, they don't really get into everything that happens in the book with the Water of Life scene with Lady Jessica and getting all those memories, and then being confronted by the place that the women fear to look, that only the Kwisatz Haderach can in. They just eschewed all of that. What they basically said is, one day Paul will have to do this, and if he wants to truly be the Kwisatz Haderach. And that sequence was a little bit weird the way they did it. It was mostly, in the book, he kind of does it in secret, and he's found, and he's in a coma for quite a long time, and Here it doesn't really feel like, I mean, he was found pretty much early on, and everybody knew he was there. But at the end of the day, you get the sense of why he did it, but they downplayed that as well. He had just a little bit of a, now I can see many futures, and they didn't make as big a deal out of him being the Kwisatz Haderach as I think it deserved. So that I was very disappointed in. It's the other main theme of the book is he the Kwisatz Haderach, and what does that mean? And they didn't really go into it that much. They had a little scene with the Reverend Mother saying this is a power that the world has never seen, but we don't get a real sense of what that power is. So it was kind of a letdown. They didn't go into the elements of Gurney believing that Lady Jessica was the traitor. They didn't even bother talking about the traitor. They never really talked about the traitor that much. And so it was a little bit of a letdown there. Would have loved to have seen that scene as well. So, yeah, with a lot of great battle sequences. I can say that the attack on Arakeen is fantastic. It's really well done. Just so impactful. So many great vistas. Seeing it IMAX was fantastic because it really lets you soak in all of the details on there. And so I got no criticism of that because in the book, it's like a paragraph. And Frank Herbert doesn't really go into it, but it deserves to be gone into. And for a movie, you would have to. The Family Atomics sequence, one wonders, because the book doesn't explain how they get it and what it means and where they are and how they're used. It was a really interesting way they did it. I'm not sure how the Atreides Corps of Engineers puts that vault in up on that cliff and brings in all those warheads and nobody notices. Very strange. And I've got questions, but the sequence where they blow up the shield wall, the worms ride in, the storm comes in, it's all just breathtaking. It's so good. That scene alone is worth the price of admission. Go and see it in the biggest theater, biggest screen that you can find because it's well worth it. And it's surprisingly faithful to a lot of those details there, the Imperial tent, and how everybody's in it, and then they burst in. And then we get to the sort of the end sequence where it's going to be Paul and Fade fighting it out. You do have Gurney fighting Raban. Doesn't happen in the book. He is denied his revenge in the book, which is why he's so insistent that when Fade is challenging Paul, that Gurney get the chance to do it, and Paul has to explain. You really think that you have lost more than I've lost, but they kind of brushed that aside. It is a fantastic knife fight. It's so well choreographed. It's brutal. It's more brutal than it is in the book. The one thing I was disappointed, though, is, again, Fade is given the short shrift. He doesn't have any sneaky apparatus that was kind of a major part of the book and was in the other previous adaptations. So I was really looking forward to it, and it wasn't in there. And then the ending itself was a curious departure. The book ends with Jessica consoling Chani and explaining to her that after Paul has declared he's going to marry Irulan to become the emperor. And she says, look, you're going to be the concubine, but history is going to look back and see the concubines were the true wives. And that doesn't happen at all. There's no real reconciliation between Jessica and Chani, which does happen in the book. They didn't really play up the rivalry so much until there was a nice little sequence where Jessica tells Paul that Aaliyah says he needs to stay unmarried so that he can have a political marriage. And when Paul takes the water of life, there's a little bit of a between Jessica and Chani there, but then she slaps the hell out of Paul. So that's really where her ire was directed. But in the book, Jessica does have this. She does realize the importance of Chani and how much she loves her, and That's not in the movie at all. And I was disappointed in that, especially with so much focus on Chani and really developing her character. Jessica's character, I think, was very much demoted, and her storyline was not at all interesting in the movie. She was very much just a B character for this movie. And so I'm really surprised at that, especially after how much they built up Jessica for the first movie and tried to say, yeah, this is a really important storyline for her, and we've really beefed up her role in the movie from what it is in the book. And I don't necessarily agree with that, but definitely in the second movie, she just doesn't have as much to do. She's not that important, and not as impactful as I was expecting. So that dialogue exchange doesn't happen. Nobody bothers to explain to her that Paul is only marrying the princess in name only. He doesn't consult Chani. Nobody does. She just books it out of there, and she's like, "I'm out." And so I guess they're kind of setting that up for another movie. I don't think they needed to. But the one thing they did get really well and right in the movie, even better than the book, in my opinion, was why the jihad happens. And I always felt like the book ended with like, well, Paul, he's in charge. He's won. He's controlling all the Fremen. I don't know how he lets them get out there and just start butchering everybody in the world. The book was not super clear on that, which is why I think a lot of people, when it first came out, for the first, until the sequel, Dune Messiah, came out, that a lot of people felt that way. And Frank Herbert felt compelled to explain that Paul is not really a hero. He's very much an anti-hero. He loses control of the Fremen, and he can't stop the jihad, because that's not crystal clear at the end of the novel. But in the movie, they do a much better job of justifying that and rationalizing why it ultimately is going to happen. And I think it's pretty well done. So the threat of him destroying the spice, also not quite as impactful in the movie. I really expected it to be more front and center. I really expected somebody from the guild to have to spell it out to the emperor, which is basically what happens in the other adaptations and in the book. But here they're just kind of like, well, you beat Fade, so I guess that's it. He was my champion, and I'm a prisoner here. And so it was a little bit fuzzier. I think people not familiar with the book are taking away a very different interpretation. And so is it, again, a matter of Denis and the other screenwriters just forgot? They didn't remember that detail from when they read the book 30 years ago? Who knows? So that's my analysis. It's not so much a review. It's a little bit of a review. It's still a great movie. In terms of an adaptation, it has its issues. It has its problems. It shouldn't stop you from enjoying it. It shouldn't stop you from seeing it. You should absolutely see it. You should see it a few times. Look for some other details, maybe some stuff that I've missed or that I misinterpreted. I'm definitely going to see it again. I have to go and see it now at a different theater so I can get that crazy popcorn bucket. Not sure what I'm going to do with it. I don't think there's any good way to incorporate it into any of these board games. I know that it's not going to stop other people from trying, and I don't understand that approach at all. But for me, as a designer, I think it's just a funny tchotchke to have. I got to figure out where I'm going to put it. My room is filled with tchotchkes already. But let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you watched this video before seeing the movie, and explain to me why. Because I do warn you, it's filled with spoilers. That's all I did was talk about the spoilers. But if you've seen it and now you've watched this video, tell me where you agree or you disagree, other things that you took away from it. What were your thoughts? Did you like it? Did you prefer any of the changes? And for me, I can't say that I preferred very many of the changes, other than Chani developing. I was fine with Shashek being elevated as a character. She doesn't actually mention giving Paul the maker hooks, which is kind of a funny thing to leave out. But I didn't mind the changes. I didn't necessarily prefer them. I missed a lot of the details that were not in there, and some of the things that were changed, I would have preferred it the other way around. I still love this. I think it's a great movie. I think it's as good as the first movie. I don't think it's better than the first movie, because the first movie, I think, gets a lot of the details. It's more details right than wrong. And it has the harder task of world building and setting things up, and it does a great job at that. So here, the second half of the book is, all about disrupting spice production to draw the emperor, and Paul, of course, having to deal with becoming the Kwisatz Haderach, and what that means. And it didn't necessarily need 2.5 hours to do that, but there's a lot of great details, a lot of fight scenes and battles and escalation that you can do, and which they did do. And so they did a great job. The action is probably better than the first movie, but they're about equal in my estimation. I look forward to watching them back to back, and that's going to be a long viewing experience. But I watch all 3 of the extended Lord of the Rings movies once every year or so, all in one sitting. And I do occasionally stop to get food and to use the bathroom, yes, but it's a whole day of Lord of the Rings, so half a day of Dune is going to be a piece of cake. So let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching. That's it for this one. We'll see you again soon.